So test is Tuesday, right? Look, and I landed right on it. So meet in the Hibernia Center as usual, right, for the test. We're going to go ahead and start the next module today, right, because we can't waste days. But the good news is next week, and I almost even forgot, is that we have Thursday and Friday off, right, not because of rain or anything like that, thank goodness. Let's hope it stays that way. It's what Delgado calls spring break. And there's a reason why it's only 2 days, because we get 3 days for Mardi Gras. And as I was saying to some other students earlier, right, students probably could petition to get it changed to an entire week, but most of the time in student government they don't care about it because everybody likes getting out early. Because if you realize, if we have more days off, then we just have a longer semester. Because we have to have 45 contact hours per semester. So yeah, if we get a lot more of these rain issues too, though, we'll end up with more days at the end of our semester. So I don't know about you, and I'm sure everyone else who's been swamped in don't want any more rain or any other weather events the rest of this semester. Because they'll forgive us a couple of days, but I forget what the cutoff is. But if we miss any more days, then we have to make them up. So let's hope that doesn't happen. So yeah. Yeah, so you're good. You'll have more time to recuperate. So let's see. So Module 2 I posted for you guys yesterday, and I know you guys' brains are on the test, though, for Tuesday, right? So normally I would give, oh, see, I looked in the wrong spot. I didn't post what I thought I posted for you guys, because for you guys it's Module 2. For my other class it's Module 3. So I posted this, and originally I had put it for Wednesday, thinking we had class on Thursday, forgetting we don't have class on Thursday. So I'll change this assignment deadline to the 28th. So that by the 29th, right, hopefully you've done it. Usually I like for you guys to do it before this lecture that I'm giving today, but it's just going to have to be after. So the other thing is, in my other class this morning, they've already done this assignment. Basically what I want you to do, oh, this is a different one, never mind. I'm getting ahead of myself. Alright, so what you will do, let me go to my student view so you can see it, because I don't think I've given you guys an assignment like this yet in Canvas, so it's a little different than probably what you're used to. Okay, so you'll see it in your to-do list or not. No, because it's too far away. It's more than a week away. So if you go to the modules, and we go to our Module 3, you see this assignment. So when you click on it, you'll see it says read the following web pages, right? So these are links that will open up separate web pages. Right, so I want you to read this page and this page. There's even a game if you dare, right? If you like playing games, it's pretty crazy. But then I want you to write 2 things you like about these pages, right? And mostly this is so that I know you read it, right? So to do that, either a text box will appear down here, or sometimes you have to click on Submit Assignment to get the text box to write to then submit the assignment. Okay? So do that by Monday midnight next week, so that hopefully you've read and wrote something before class on the 29th, right? Leave the page, and actually I want to leave my student view. And I am going to copy this. You guys get to see the inner workings of Canvas. Content page. New. Module 3 videos, and probably spelled that wrong. I'll fix it after. I forgot to do that. So those pages are also here too, because I mean they're that good, right? So I repeat them on my video and animation. Probably should say web page thing. We're going to actually watch a couple of these videos today. So that's why I was like, I need this. Where is it? And then these are links to animations, right? For those of you guys that like that kind of stuff. And there's even some of those, I think, in our Connect assignments. Cancel on that. I did spell animations right. Wow. That's impressive. Alright, so one other thing. Thank you to those of you guys that helped out with Delgado Day yesterday. If you did, alright, in the bonus section, right, you click and make sure that you tell me how long you helped out. So I'll give you your points. And then we have one more bonus opportunity, and there's a couple others, right, that I told you guys about that I'll be posting here in the bonus section as well. But I also have to calculate your guys' max bonus because I can't exceed a certain number of points because then, anyways, there's a formula. I gotta look it up. I can't give you guys too many bonus points, right? I have to stay within a particular range, or my boss will come, you know, cut my head off. So I don't want that. But one of them is this Monday, right? So, which is at 2:30, second floor of the Student Life Building and the Lake Maupaw room. So one of the things that I did for my other class is, you know, I'm going to be there, so I'm going to know if you're there or not, for one. But, you know, it's meant to be an educational thing. I can't just give you points for going to something, right? You have to actually do something. And so I want you to take notes, right? But some of you guys, if you want, instead of having to then type your notes here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on that you can take a picture of your notes and upload that file. So I just added being able to do file uploads instead of just text. So if you want to just take a picture and upload. So this is very similar to that other assignment. And in fact, let me go to my student mode and see what it looks like because I didn't do that with my other class. His lecture, no, I don't have permission to do that. And I'm not going to ask him. Yeah. Yeah. Like if you have a tape recorder, I just don't have one. Yeah. Come, yeah. Yeah, his dad's super cool. Yeah, so, I don't know. I don't think I have enough memory on my phone to do it either. But, so when you click on it, I just don't know how I feel about asking him. When you click on it, right, again, hit submit assignment, but notice, like, it should give us, yeah, so right here, you would click browse and find where you saved that file on your computer, or your smartphone even. I think you probably could do this from, right, and then submit. Once you've added the file, you have to hit, once you found it, you have to hit add file, and it'll add it. Okay? So, gotta love technology, huh? Alright, so going to today's lecture, On immunity. So we're going to start out with inflammation because it's probably one of the most important responses and ways of getting the white blood cells to the area where infection is happening. All right? Because I'm going to do me a favor and close the door because I know at some point it's going to get noisy. And I'm going to play some videos for you guys this morning. So for inflammation, you need to be able to outline the process, right? Know the major steps in the process. Focusing on the factors that initiate the response, right? So how do we get this started? And then what are the outcomes? Why do we do this? What's the benefit of inflammation? And I forgot about something. So because of Delgado Day, I actually made one of the specialized media that you guys are getting tested on Tuesday. So this is, anyone know?
Blood agar?
It's blood agar, right? You can tell by the redness associated with this plate. And then also there's a greenish growth. So what type of hemolysis? This is alpha. Alpha is the green one. Beta is what? Clear, right? The bad one, right? So this is actually a swab from my mouth. Everybody's got Streptococcus mutans in their mouth. It is the one that contributes to tooth decay. It's the one that makes up the biofilm that we know as plaque on our teeth, right? So everyone's got it. Got news for you, right? So I have a ready supply of Streptococcus mutans, and what's really good about this is that it's alpha hemolytic, right? So whenever I want to show my students alpha hemolysis, I just do a mouth swab and rub it on a blood agar plate, if I've got blood agar plates, which I do actually have a few left from last semester. So it's sealed up, right? It is the same bacteria you have in your mouth, so it's not going to jump off the plate and hurt you. We can pass this around. You can look at it, right? So you want to pass it that way and then up around. Okay. So we definitely want to stop bad guys like that, though, when they get into our system. And one of the ways we're going to do that is with inflammation. So what's the purpose, right? So why do we want inflammation? What is it going to help us do? It's going to help repair damage. What else? Right? We want cells to get to that area, right? We want to contain that area. So the purpose is to contain that site of damage, right? We want to keep everything right there. So all the defenders go to the site of injury. We want to keep that response. We want to keep what's going on in that local area. We want to eliminate any invaders. Right on site, we want to kill them. And then, of course, we want to restore any damage to tissue. So what do we see or feel when you have inflammation? Pain, heat, swelling. Itchiness is not really necessarily a result of inflammation. That's some other reaction going on, huh? Redness, yes, redness. So we have swelling, we have redness, we have heat, and pain. And sometimes loss of function. So think about this as we go through the process, like why does it swell up? Why is it red? Why is it hot? Why is it painful? So these two videos, I keep forgetting to change my PowerPoint, are of course in Canvas because we are no longer using Blackboard, right? And I just added them. You guys watched me do that because I forgot. So they are in our modules. on our animations page. And so we're going to watch this one first. Make it full screen. Once we have the ability to skip the ad. There we go.
Leukocytes are white blood cells that help fight infection. At sites of injury, infection, or inflammation, cytokines are released and stimulate endothelial cells that line adjacent blood vessels. The endothelial cells then express surface proteins called selectins. Selectins bind to carbohydrates displayed on the membrane of the leukocytes, causing them to stick to the walls of the blood vessels. This binding interaction is of sufficiently low affinity that the leukocytes can literally roll along the vessel walls in search for points to exit the vessel. There, they adhere tightly and squeeze between endothelial cells without disrupting the vessel walls, then crawl out of the blood vessel into the adjacent connective tissue. Here, leukocyte rolling is observed directly in an anesthetized mouse. The up and down movement of the frame is due to the mouse's breathing. Two blood vessels are shown. The upper one is an artery with blood flowing from right to left. The lower one is a vein with blood flowing from left to right. Leukocytes only adhere to the surface of veins. They do not crawl out of arteries. Some leukocytes are firmly attached and are in the process of crawling through the vessel walls, whereas others have already left the vessel and are seen in the surrounding connective tissue. When the blood flow is stopped temporarily by gently clamping the vessels, we can appreciate how densely both vessels are filled with red blood cells. Red blood cells do not interact with the vessel walls and move so fast under normal flow that we cannot see them. When the blood flow is restored, some of the leukocytes continue rolling, whereas all non-interacting cells are immediately washed away by the shear.
Some of my all-time favorite videos. Is that not cool? Right? I could watch it a million times, and by the time I end my career, I probably will have. I got to stop this or it'll keep going. I'm going to make sure I hit the right thing. The people who did that, I have no idea how they did that. I found these videos several years ago on the web, and then I had downloaded them to my computer, and I used to upload them to Blackboard and stuff like that. But as you guys know, videos and stuff take up a lot of storage space. And then I found one day someone had posted them on YouTube. I was like, yes, I love YouTube. It's great, right? All my stuff is posted on YouTube now, right? It's free storage. Why not? Everything is in the stratosphere. But one of the really cool things about that video, and let me see if I can restart. It'll let me. Nope. So I just gotta click it. Oh, the back button, yeah. Yeah, and I should have, because now they're gonna kill me with. There we go. Kill me.
Are white blood cells that help fight infection.
With ads. That's the only thing.
At sites of injury, infection, or inflammation.
All right. I'll just mute her for a second, because I wanted to get to a particular point in here. But, so, again, remember I told you to focus on certain things. So how does this all start? So how did this all start? Right, that we're signaling, we're using cytokines to signal, right, that there's a problem on site, right? And then that signal these cells are responding to, right, to be able to grab onto these cells that are actually going to do something. Anyone know what they're going to do when they get to the site?
They're going to destroy the infection?
They're going to actually literally phagocytize and eat up bacteria or viruses, our own dead cells and debris. And then the other thing she talks about in the video is a question for my anatomy and physiology students. Let me make sure I hit the right one. What type of vessel did she say this was?
Vein.
It was a vein. And she said they don't come out of arteries. So anatomy-wise, why does it make sense that this would not happen in your arteries? So what's...
If the arteries burst, it would bleed out from the inside?
Well, yeah, but I mean, we're slightly disrupting, right? The layer of cells in the vein for the white blood cells to crawl through. Right. Veins are under much less pressure, right? And as you saw, especially when they clamped it and stuff, right? You saw that artery at the top you still had kind of stuff going, right? But it definitely significantly slowed down in the veins. So yeah, the veins are under a lot less pressure, and so more apt for this to be able to happen. The other thing is that arteries too, remember, have a muscular layer to them. So the white blood cells would have to crawl through that layer in order to get to, and it's just, you know, a physical barrier that would make it much harder for the white blood cells to get where they need to go. So they crawl out of venules, right, veins, maybe even capillaries, but they're not crawling out of arteries. Arteries are under too much pressure, right, and they have that additional muscular layer associated with them. So the next one we're going to watch, again, remember what's going to start this process is the cells in that area that have been damaged are going to signal that they need the white blood cells to come and help them out. So in this next video, and I have to say I have no idea how they did these, but they're super cool, right? It's cool to actually see the real thing happening instead of just an animation. So for this next one, oops, that's not the one I want. I want leukocyte homing.
Lymphocyte homing to a site of injury. To visualize lymphocyte homing to a site of injury, a zebrafish larva was anesthetized and its fin pierced with a needle to introduce a small wound. A vein is seen at the bottom of the frame. Because the fin is very thin and transparent, we can watch directly as lymphocytes crawl out of the blood vessel and migrate towards the wound. They are attracted there by chemicals released from damaged cells, invading bacteria, and other lymphocytes. In a zoomed-out view, we can appreciate that lymphocyte invasion is restricted to the wounded area. The static cells that are dispersed in the connective tissue are fibroblasts. In these movies, 60 minutes of real time are compressed into 15 seconds.
So over an hour, right, those cells came rushing just to that one area. So what are fibroblast cells? Another anatomy and physiology question for my A&P kids. They make the connective tissue, right? Pretty cool, huh? I like them. All right, so now we're going to watch, what's the word I want? Animation. This one's from the textbook. So this one's going to go into a little bit more detail than the previous one we watched.
The inflammatory response is an important nonspecific defense against tissue damage. It begins when injured tissue cells release chemical signals that activate the endothelial cells of nearby capillaries. Within the capillaries, adhesion molecules called selectins are displayed on the activated endothelial cells. These adhesion molecules attract neutrophils, slow them down, and cause the neutrophils to roll along the endothelium. As the neutrophils roll along the endothelium, they encounter chemicals that activate integrins. which are adhesion receptors on their surfaces. These integrins then tightly attach to adhesion receptor molecules on the endothelial cells. This causes the neutrophils to stick to the endothelium and stop rolling. This accumulation of neutrophils along the walls of the capillary is referred to as margination. The inflammatory mediators released by the injured tissue bring about changes in the environment that cause mast cells to degranulate and release histamine. Histamine causes vasodilation and an opening of the junctions between the endothelial cells, allowing fluid and leukocytes to leave the capillary and enter the infected tissue. The neutrophils now undergo dramatic changes in shape and squeeze through the endothelial wall into the interstitial tissue fluid. This process is called extravasation. The neutrophils, followed by other types of phagocytes, are attracted to the damaged site by chemotactic substances released by bacteria and tissue breakdown products. They ingest and destroy invading bacteria.
Pretty cool. So did you guys notice the leaking? They showed the leaking here for this. So think about this. As fluid is leaving your bloodstream and going into your tissue, this is why inflammation has the sign of what? Swelling. This is why it swells, right? That fluid that's normally in your blood is now leaking into your tissues. And it's kind of a side effect of the fact that we opened the door, right? And so it's going to go. And we had to open the door to get the white blood cells there because they're going to help us physically destroy, right? By phagocytosis, they're actually eating up and destroying these guys. When you have increased blood flow to an area, that area becomes what? When you go to the gym and work out, right, especially if you're fair-skinned like me, I start to get what? Red and hot. And that's because blood flow to my skin has increased. Not because my skin needs extra blood, right? It's actually my muscles that are going to need more blood. But they're going to generate byproducts from working out, right? One of those byproducts is, what happens to you?
An acid?
You start sweating. Before you sweat, you got what? Hot, right? You got hot. When you're working, right, you generate heat. Those cellular processes generate heat. So you got to get rid of that heat, right? So how do you get rid of that heat? Sweating, right? But sweating, what it does is create convection where? On your skin. So guess where the heat goes to go away? Your skin. So the increased blood flow is because your blood actually is what holds the heat, right? Your blood is going to get hot. It's going to travel to your skin to get rid of that heat at the surface of your body. So when you have increased blood flow, it's red, right? Because blood is red. And that's why it's hot. One of the reasons why it's hot is because blood is hot. So that explains most of our signs, right? Increased blood flow to get the white blood cells there, right? That makes it red and hot. You get the blood vessels becoming leaky, permeable. The fluid goes, that's the swelling. So what's the one we haven't talked about? Pain. When you swell, it pushes up against the pain receptors. That's why it hurts. How do you tell the difference between an Asian and African elephants?
The ears?
The ears. What do we have at our zoo?
Asian.
Asian, because the ears are
shaped like India and they're smaller.
They're smaller, right? Because Asian elephants, their climate isn't as hot as African elephants, right? African elephants live in a really hot climate. They have huge ears. Because what they, guess what?
Ironically.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, their ears are shaped like Africa?
Yes.
It's pretty cool. I guess they kind of are. But the reason for that is the hot climate. That adaptation, that difference between the different elephants has to do with their environment, right? So the ones with the huge ears were beneficial because guess what? That's a huge surface area for getting rid of heat, right? They pump their blood into their ears and even go one step further. They fan their ears to help cool their blood. That's one of the ways they cool off, is having those huge ears for African elephants.
So humans, is taking an anti-inflammatory not a good thing?
Ah, good question. Good question. Yeah, so when you take an anti-inflammatory, you are, of course, impeding this process. So depending on why you're taking that, yeah, you could actually be making the situation worse instead of better, right? So that's why, and what's in your medicine cabinet that's anti-inflammatory? Ibuprofen. You should never take that unless your doctor tells you to do so. Unless you've been instructed by a doctor, you should not be taking ibuprofen. Right? Because you're impeding the inflammatory process. Sometimes we want to impede that process, right? When it's happening too much and you don't have infection, right? So people who have injuries where you know that there isn't any there's no infection related to that. But, you know, if you have infection and you take an anti-inflammatory, you're impeding your immune system's response to that infection. And then when you're sick, y'all, just a little tip. Write down when you take medication, because this weekend I almost OD'd on Tylenol because I took too much. Because I didn't keep track of how much I took. And cold medicine like Dayquil already has acetaminophen Tylenol in it. And so if you take more on top of that, and especially if you don't notice that it's maximum strength you have in your cabinet, you can get into trouble. Which I almost did. Which is pretty stupid. Considering, you know, right? But when you're sick, you don't think straight. So a little tip, write it down. My husband was sick too, so he couldn't babysit me. So it was like the blind leading the blind. It was not good. It's not good. But yeah, I mean, I like never take ibuprofen. Very rarely do I take that. So, and sometimes when I'm sick, I try not to take cold medicine and stuff like that because some of it will impede the process. But acetaminophen is more of a pain thing, and I was taking it for pain. I thought my head was going to explode. So, from the head cold. Does that make sense to you guys? Good thinking, Kat, Leah. All right. So, what causes the release of the inflammatory mediators? The damaged cells, and you have white blood cells on scene, right? We'll name these guys later. I mean, we'll go over their names. But you have resident macrophages. These are ones that can eat bacteria as they come in. You have them in your skin. You have them in your major organs. They're all over the place. They're your guys right on guard. They themselves will engulf and, you know, destroy by phagocytosis, but they will release mediators. And then do you guys remember what other cells were in the tissue that helped with this process by releasing signaling molecules like histamine? The mast cells, right? So tissue damage, when your cells are damaged, they're going to send out that signal, you know, that we're in trouble, we need help. The invading microbes themselves, they release substances that our system can detect and know that invasion has happened. So how do the white blood cells get to the damaged area? How do they get there?
They squeeze through the veins.
Right, they come out of our blood, right? They travel on the major superhighway of our bloodstream. So we increase blood flow to get them there, to that area. So what do we see because of this increased blood flow? Swelling, redness, heat. What do we feel? Pain, right? The 4 cardinal signs. That's representing a red blood cell, yeah. So remember, the redness is because your blood is red, right? And you're increasing the flow to that area. And again, your blood is hot. That's why you have heat. And then the swelling is because the liquid portion of your blood actually is leaking out. And then that is pushing up against that swelling, that extra fluid is pushing up against your pain receptors. That's why it's painful. So what proteins are in the fluid phase of our blood that enters into the tissue? Anyone know? So when blood vessels are damaged, there's a special set of molecules in there that help to clog up that blood vessel, because we don't want uncontrolled, right, bleeding into the tissue. So what helps do that? Platelets are pieces of cells, but I'm talking more about proteins. Yeah, the ones that are involved in what? What do we refer to that process as? That's going to help with a damaged blood vessel?
Hemoglobin?
Clotting. Clotting. Your clotting proteins. So your clotting factors, right? And they're going to act like crime tape, right? And they're going to seal off the scene, right? They will help with that area as well. In addition, things we haven't talked about yet, you have antibodies. Those are proteins against specific pathogens. Those are going to leak into the area. A set of proteins known as the complement system that we're going to talk about later that's found in your blood will then leak into the tissues during inflammation. A very special protein that helps you transport what element? It's called transferrin, so iron, right? Iron isn't very water soluble, right? And mostly the liquid phase of your blood is water. So to be able to transport iron, it has a chaperone protein attached to it. One of them that we produce is transferrin. This also will help us too in that any iron from damaged cells is going to be picked up by the transferrin. We want this to happen because iron is needed for metabolism for bacteria too, right? Remember, it's one of the trace elements that they need. It's one of the reasons why, what happened to my blood plate? Didn't make it back to me yet. It's why they poke the holes in those red blood cells, right? Because what's a very high concentration inside those red blood cells? Iron, right? Bacteria need iron for their metabolism, just like we need iron. They need it too. The transferrin, if it binds to the iron, it stops them from getting it. So we're like, no, that's our iron. You can't have it. Of course, they have ways of getting around transferrin and stuff like that, of course. But not all of them. We can keep it away from most of the bad guys. So how do the white blood cells get out of the bloodstream? So a little bit more specific here. What's happening in this picture? Yeah, they squeeze out of the blood vessel, but before they even squeeze out, right, they attach to it, right? They have adhesion molecules that are being expressed. These aren't always expressed on the blood vessels, right? Just when we're dealing with inflammation. When those cells have been signaled to express those selectants, right? So we can select for those white blood cells. We collectively refer to these as adhesion molecules, right? So those adhesion molecules not seen here are what is allowing them to literally adhere, right? And then move through the blood vessel wall into the tissue. So pro-inflammatory cytokines, those are the chemical messages, cause those endothelial cells to express those adhesion molecules so that the white blood cells literally are adhering. So they grab on, and then they're going to travel, right? When they squeeze through, that's referred to as diapedesis. Diapedesis actually means oozing, right? So again, they're oozing out of the blood vessels. Yeah. So one of my favorite videos that sometimes I show you guys when I have time, but it's on my video list. This guy cracks me up. One of my students says he reminds them a lot of me. So this one, this video is not too long. Crash course biology. I guess he does a lot of videos, this guy. He's pretty funny. But, you know, he talks about diapedesis and the oozing, right? And I have to say, he's the reason why I remember, right? Diapedesis, right? So sometimes, and natural killer cells were named the year I was born in 1973. So, you know, he talks about that. And so I was like, cool. I wish, you know, 1973 named all the cells too, because that is the coolest name, right? And it tells you what that cell does. It kills, right? They are natural killers. They naturally kill. So that's a worth your time. But I'm not going to take up class time to play it. Oops. So what are the specific names of the white blood cells that enter the tissue during inflammation in order from first to arrive to last? So the very first ones, right, that are going to get called in are definitely these guys, the major big eaters, right? And any of you guys remember from the animation, what was the first? Neutrophils. Neutrophils. And pretty much these guys only really go into the tissue when they're called there during inflammation. They're not normally in our tissue. They go there during inflammation. The other ones that are going to arrive in this process are the big eaters. So they're called macrophages. And macrophages are called monocytes in your blood. And they differentiate into these much more powerful eaters, these big eaters called macrophages in our tissues. And then, if they come, you're going to have specialized white blood cells that can do things like make antibodies. And those would be your, yep, but what's the general class for a plasma cell? Lymphocytes, which is exactly why, Daniel, I'm going to tell you guys, don't ever use the term leukocyte, because a lot of students confuse it with lymphocyte, like Daniel just did. Right? Leukocyte means white blood cell. All of them. Lymphocyte is a special group of white blood cells. It doesn't include all white blood cells. So you see how if you confuse these two terms, you're going to be in trouble? Right? I always told my students in A and P, just call them white blood cells. Right? It's easier to spell too, right, on the practical exam? Right? Right? Just say white blood cells. I used to years ago. So, white blood cells, right, there are different ones that do different jobs, right? So we've introduced a couple, right? Next time we're going to really get into the specifics of them, right? So some of them are neutrophils, and macrophages and lymphocytes. And they all have, you know, different jobs, different functions. And so there's a reason why neutrophils are first, and then more macrophages are going to come. And the reason why I say more macrophages is because, remember, as I said in the beginning, you have resident macrophages that live there all the time. But we're going to call in reinforcements when we're dealing with inflammation. And then we may even need even more specialized white blood cells, the lymphocytes, to come help out. And they're part of our adaptive immune response, where we can adapt and change over time. So what do the white blood cells do? What are they doing in this picture? Yeah, if they're phagocytic cells, which are the main ones that get called in, right? The neutrophils and the macrophages that were already there and the macrophages that get called there, they're going to phagocytize, they're going to destroy, literally physically eat invading microbes. So they're going to destroy and remove the invaders. And they're going to ingest dead cells and debris.
The basophils and the eosinophils, are those also part of the white blood family?
Mm-hmm. We're going to get to them. So what is pus? Right? When you have a cut and it gets pussy, what is that?
The dead cells?
Yeah, it's dead cells, your own cells. It's dead neutrophils, right? So dead neutrophils, tissue debris, and if we haven't eliminated them, the pathogens, the microbes. And this is why you don't want to touch someone else's pus, right? This is why we go, ooh, other than the fact it looks ooh, right? It's gross. So pimples, right, are a skin infection of the hair follicle, right, a bacterial infection typically, right, of your own bacteria. They're eating the sebum, which is the oily substance you produce so that your hair will slide out of the hair follicle. Well, sometimes the bacteria will grow in that hair follicle and eat that, right, and grow to such a level that you have an infection. And, you know, you've got inflammation, you've got white blood cells going there, and you've got them dying, and so you get that pus. Although even I can't resist popping my own zits, I have to say. They say you shouldn't do that. Because, again, you're just creating more damage when you're popping it, and you're releasing that pus to the outside, which means it can move to other follicles. Your best bet, believe it or not, if it's, you know, 1 or 2 zits, right, and you don't have a more serious problem where your body, unfortunately, is producing too much oil, right, so your entire face is covered or some other area of your body is covered, triple antibiotic ointment, baby, right? Triple antibiotic ointment. Throw some antibiotics. It's a bacterial infection, right? And 1 or 2 days, it'll clear up, right? But, of course, you don't want to slather your whole face in antibiotic ointment, right? So if it's 1 or 2 zits, yeah, right? If it's your whole face, that's when you get at the root of the problem, and the fact is your body's producing too much oil for the bacteria to eat.
But it doesn't have to come out of your body?
It does not have to come out. It will come out on its own. You do not have to force it physically. If it doesn't come out, though, then it should be forced out physically, but in a sterile manner. In other words, go to the doctor's office. Yeah, in a clean way. Sometimes you're just creating more damage. Resist the urge. Put some triple antibiotic ointment on and go to bed. All right, so let's review. So for this inflammatory response, right, normal blood flow in the tissue as when the injury occurs. But then the injured cells, any resident macrophages, any bacteria themselves, they're going to release substances that are going to be inflammatory mediators. So now we're going to get the increased blood flow so that we can get the white blood cells there to destroy the invaders and to clean up the mess that's made by the damage. So more white blood cells, and only really during inflammation do the neutrophils go into the tissue. And then even more monocytes, which turn into macrophages, are going to come. These are the guys that have been recruited, as opposed to the ones that were there to begin with, right? So you have macrophages there to begin with, but there's not enough there to take care of a breach like that, right? You got to call in reinforcements. So you got to call in the neutrophils, you got to call in more macrophages to clean up the mess. When do the dendritic cells? Dendritic cells are resident cells, so along with the macrophages, they would be there. And they phagocytize, but that's not their main job. Their main job is sharing that information with your adaptive immune response. Even though they're phagocytic cells, that's not their main job. Macrophages and neutrophils, that's their main job, is to eat and destroy and kill. Good attention to detail, Bridget. Okay, so review. Purpose. Why are we doing this? Not this week, thank goodness, right? Why does inflammation happen? Right, to eliminate invaders, right? We also, where do we want this to happen? Where do we want the invaders? We want to trap them, right? We want to localize it. We want to keep them in that area, right? So we want to contain the site of damage, right? So we're going to go to the site. We're not going to wait until it gets to us. We're going to go to the site. We want to keep it localized, right? So again, notice the cells are going to where they're called. And of course, we want to eliminate any invaders that may have gotten in. We are not a free hotel. Right? No free rides. And then, of course, we need to restore function to that tissue. And that's why sometimes, depending on where swelling happens, where inflammation happens, you know, especially if you have loss of function, we want to restore that as quickly and as safely as possible. So again, what are our 4 main signs that you're going to see? You're going to see swelling, redness, you're going to feel heat and pain. So in truth, swelling and redness we can see, right? And you can feel heat. Those are all signs. In truth, pain is what we call a symptom. Because unless you tell the doctor, they don't know you're in pain, right? And sometimes you'll get inflammation, you won't get significant pain. And then, unfortunately, this is a subjective thing, right? And if you're going to be a veterinarian, you don't deal with symptoms, do you, right? Just signs. Your patients do not talk. You can maybe assume that they're in pain, right? But even then, you could be wrong. Because they can't talk. Dr. Doolittle is not real. Which is sometimes good, right? Because, you know, the subjective nature, right, of disease can be misleading. Symptoms can be misleading. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So then, of course, sometimes loss of function. So acute inflammation is when it's short-term, right? Macrophages are able to clean up the damage, ingest the dead cells and debris, and get us back to normal relatively quickly. When acute inflammation fails, we run into what we refer to as chronic inflammation. And this is where macrophages can't eliminate the invader. They'll even fuse together to form giant cells. And then T cells will even get into the mix, and we'll get these large collections of cells referred to as granulomas. What disease in the lungs is giant cells and granuloma formation seen? It's a bacteria we're not good at eliminating on our own. You have to take antibiotics to kill it. Tuberculosis. Sometimes referred to as consumption. Because over time, because the patient macrophages weren't able to kill it, it just keeps growing in this mass, and we just keep getting more macrophages and T cells into the granuloma. And then pretty soon, the granuloma takes up all the space in the lung, that you have no more space for gas exchange. So eventually, it consumes the patient, right? They die. This was before we had drug treatment, right? So they believe Doc Holliday in the old days, died of consumption, tuberculosis. It was a worldwide problem, and it still is even to this day because of the difficulties of treatment with tuberculosis, because of it being inside of our cells, right? The drug treatment is much longer drug treatment than for most bacterial infections. You're talking 6 to 9 months of taking antibiotics. Trying to get patients to comply with that and actually do that is very difficult. So then we've had resistance build up. And so we've got strains of tuberculosis that are multi-drug resistant and extremely drug resistant forms of tuberculosis. There was an idiot named Mr. Speaker who got on an airplane several years ago with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. There was a huge national uproar about it. He claimed apparently his doctor didn't tell him he couldn't do that. Whatever. He went to some wedding in like Italy or something. I followed the story for quite some time, but I never saw any reports, thank God, of anyone getting it from him on that plane. But y'all, as little as 10 bacteria you inhale from him like coughing near you or something, you could get that disease. And that was the really frightening thing, is that he had multi-drug resistant. You're limited as to which drugs we can give you. They were really fearful that he had the extremely drug resistant, where, just a few drugs work against that strain. Are we going to get to the point when none of our drugs work?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, probably so. And that's a frightening world to live in. So what's a giant cell? What did I say a giant cell was? Just macrophages that fuse together when the invader's not destroyed. So they basically eat each other, right, to try and keep it contained. But that's all they can do. It's like, just keep throwing more paper towels on a leak. Right? Unless you actually stop the leak, you're going to be throwing paper towels on it forever. You're just going to have this big meshy pile of paper towels. And that's what happens. You end up with this big, huge pile of fused together macrophages. Then you actually get other cells that come to try to help. And those are what? The T cells. So when you reach the granuloma state, it isn't just giant cells, it's T cells coming in there as well, trying to help eliminate the invader. Because T cells can help macrophages become better killers. But of course, it doesn't work either. And it just keeps growing. Mm-hmm. So this next picture I stole from the internet. When I do that, I give credit to the website in my notes. See? That's where I stole it from. So it's, in other words, my way of saying it's not in your book, right? Which I hope to change that soon too. So this beautiful picture, you can see we have two different types of granulomas that they're showing here in response to tuberculosis, sometimes abbreviated just TB infection. So here's a granulomer environment favoring bacterial cytal function, where we might actually kill these guys, right? Cytal means death. So you have these macrophages that aren't killing it, but the bacteria are rupturing out of them. And then other macrophages are engulfing them, right? So these are macrophages here. So the abbreviation for macrophage a lot of times is this M and this O with a slash through it. Actually, I think it's a Greek letter, but I don't know which one it is. And so this type that you see associated here is it has to do with how that macrophage is behaving under these conditions. And then you have type 2, which you're seeing down here in this one where we're not being successful. And we've got a lot of these giant cells or foam cells. And the difference between the giant cell and the foam cell accumulates a lot of the lipid substances, and so they look kind of fatty, foamy. So they're just a little bit different type of basically a giant cell, where these macrophages are fusing because they can't kill the bacteria. Unfortunately, these are regulatory B cells that are in the area, and where's my key? Regulatory T cells. So they're trying to regulate the situation, but we're not resolving the problem of the bacteria. So this is where the bacteria are persisting, right? They're staying inside the macrophages, and we've got these giant cell formations. Other times they'll rupture out, as you see up here, and then notice we've even got some neutrophils that are coming on scene and are actually devouring the bacteria. So there's hope that under this circumstance, right, this response, they're going to maybe be able to eliminate the bacteria. But in this case, right, this is just going to keep growing. So damaging effects of inflammation. So how is a sprinkler system similar to our inflammatory response? So fire happens, right? Sprinklers go off. So why is that good? It's going to contain the fire, right? Maybe contain it to the computer lab and keep it from taking out the whole building. The problem is a computer lab, if you have a sprinkler system go off in there, do you have a computer lab anymore? No. You have a whole bunch of junk, because electronics and water do not mix, but neither do fire either, right? But the good news of the situation is, right, the fire did not spread to the whole building, right? We saved the building. The bad news is we just lost our computer lab. Well, think about this as far as your body goes, right? Can we afford to, like, lose a room? Can we, lose a few cells in our skin? Sure, right? So when those neutrophils come into that area, right, sometimes they're very destructive. I call them the suicide bombers, because they will literally kill themselves to try and kill the invaders sometimes. So in that process, they'll kill our own cells, right? But we've got cells to spare, right? In our skin, sure, no problem. We can replace them, right? We can replace the computer lab, right? But which would you rather replace, a computer lab or an entire building? Yeah, definitely, right? The lab, right? We can find a way to fund that, possibly. Not in this state right now, right? But in our body, the same principle, right? We can afford to lose a little bit as long as we stay alive, right? The whole body doesn't succumb to this infection. But there are some areas that are quite sensitive, and that when we have inflammation and we create damage to our own infrastructure, we could create so much damage that it's unrecoverable, right? So what are those sensitive systems in our body where we really kind of don't want too much inflammation? We don't want the possibility of destruction of our own cells.
Nervous system?
Nervous system. Definitely the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. So when we have infections of the membranes that surround the brain and the spinal cord, called the meninges, this is called meningitis, right? Whenever you say itis, it just means that that area is inflamed. So in this case, the meninges. The bad news with that is that your brain and your spinal cord are encased in what? It's pretty darn hard. Bone. Bone, your skull and your vertebrae. When you have swelling, do they allow for that increased fluid? No. So instead, that increased fluid pushes back on your brain and your spinal cord. That's why, right, sometimes they're like, we need to relieve the pressure. What do? They literally drill a hole in your skull to relieve the pressure. When you have swelling associated anywhere else in your body, your skin stretches to accommodate that, right? Bone does not. So having inflammation in the brain and the spinal cord can create a serious problem because of the location and the importance of that system. In your kidneys, if you have significant inflammation there and significant damage, the functional units of your kidneys, you're born with like millions of them, right? But that's all you get. They don't regenerate. So if you damage them, you don't get any more. You damage too many, you'll die. That's why kidney infections, right, can be very serious and life-threatening. And that's probably why they gave us two. Kind of have a spare, right? Unless you gave your spare tire to someone else, then you're screwed. Or maybe you'll need someone else to give you their spare tire to save your butt. Make sense? Okay. So it prevents the spread, but it causes damage, right? Sprinkler systems suppress the spread, right? It's going to keep it hopefully from taking the whole building, but it does cause damage in the process. And so does inflammation. Sometimes it's going to create damage as it's trying to eliminate the invaders. So enzymes, toxic compounds from those phagocytic cells are released and can damage tissues. So although it looked like a pretty little orchestrated thing, right? Those cells going in and just eating, that's not the only thing that will happen. If we have inflammation that's limited to, say, a cut on our finger, then damage is usually minimal, right? We can afford some loss. But delicate systems, right? Those membranes surrounding the brain and the spinal cord, and the fact that it's encased in brain, this can be quite severe and even life-threatening. Especially if, right, in the case of like tuberculosis, right, sometimes we can't get rid of the guy. So then the cells just keep coming, right? So if you have inflammation of the meninges and you can't eliminate the invader and the inflammation just keeps coming, you're going to run out of space. So last one, cell death and the inflammatory process. So apoptosis is programmed cell death that does not trigger the inflammatory response. So why would you not want to trigger an inflammatory response every time a cell died? You'd be in a constant state of inflammation. Every 120 days, your red blood cells die. Those are super long-distance truckers, y'all. They work their asses off for those 120 days. So they're constantly they're dying off and being recycled. You would always be inflamed if every time one of your cells' life cycle ended. So we just couldn't maintain that, right? It would be happening all the time. Inflammation is costly, right? Those cells take energy. So we would always be inflamed. And it would be difficult to support that level of response. Is it necessary? Do we need inflammation when our cells die?
At times, yes.
At times, yeah. It depends on why they're dying, right? Are they dying because it's the end of their life cycle like a red blood cell? Do we need inflammation for that? No. They're just done. If they were invaded by something, then yeah, right? We need inflammation. So cryoprotesis, if our receptors, right, if our system says, yes, bad guy on board, then we may cause the system to inflame. We may give off that inflammatory response. So how do we know it was invasion or just normal cell death? We have receptors for detecting this, right? We have specific receptors. I know. I asked for a few minutes. You guys gave it to me, so I'm done. Yes and no.